It began with a question that no one in the royal family, or the world, was ready to face. What if everything we believed about Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor was a lie? What if the bloodline, the lineage so meticulously guarded for centuries, suddenly unraveled with a single test? Imagine the silence in Buckingham Palace as King Charles, poised and regal as ever, reads words that make his hands tremble. Picture Prince Harry, a man who has spent his life navigating the labyrinth of royal scrutiny, standing pale, heart pounding, as the truth stabs him in a way nothing else ever has. The question that hung in the air was simple but terrifying. Could it really be true? Could Archie, the boy who has captivated millions around the world, not be Prince Harry's son? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The morning had begun like any other. The sun cast a golden glow across the palace grounds, the birds chirped, and the quiet footsteps of aides echoed softly along the corridors. Yet beneath the serene surface, tension simmered. A single envelope, discreetly handed over by a lawyer from a trusted but secretive source, was about to ignite a scandal that would shake the monarchy to its core. Courtiers whispered, phones buzzed in hidden pockets, and a single secret, long buried, was clawing its way into the light. No one could have prepared for the magnitude of what was about to be revealed. This story is not just about one family. It is about a lineage that has shaped nations, influenced history, and commanded loyalty for centuries. And now, it teetered on the edge of chaos. Why does this matter now? Because in a world obsessed with truth, transparency, and the idea that even the most powerful are accountable, the revelation about Archie Harrison does more than shock. It challenges the very foundation of trust, bloodlines, and royal decorum. The palace, often seen as an impenetrable fortress of tradition, suddenly found itself exposed, vulnerable, and raw. Every move, every whispered conversation, every carefully planned public appearance would be re-examined under a ruthless spotlight. As the envelope was opened, King Charles's eyes narrowed. He read, reread, and then his expression changed. There was a flicker of disbelief, then a shadow of dread. In a matter of seconds, the king's world had shifted. The words on the page carried implications that no advisor, no legal counsel, could have prepared him for. Meanwhile, Prince Harry, miles away but connected through frantic texts and urgent phone calls, felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. Every memory of Archie's infancy, every quiet moment, every photo and public appearance now carried a new, haunting question. Who really is this child? Who really belongs in the lineage that generations have fought to preserve? The DNA report was not just a piece of paper. It was a hammer striking at the very core of the family. And yet, the public could not yet see the storm. The palace, known for its control over information and mastery of narrative, was grappling internally with a truth that would eventually explode into headlines, viral social media posts, and endless speculation. In that moment, King Charles realized that the consequences would extend far beyond his immediate family. The monarchy's credibility, the public's faith, and the delicate dance of royal diplomacy all hung precariously in the balance. The question was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, immediate, and devastating. Think about it. How often do you encounter a revelation so explosive that it forces a family to confront secrets decades old? How often do you see a man who has borne the weight of public scrutiny crumble in private as the truth slices through carefully maintained facades? These are not abstract concepts. They are human, raw, and infinitely compelling. And yet, this was not just about heartbreak or scandal. It was about the very identity of Archie Harrison, a boy who had been celebrated, photographed, and adored around the globe. For him, the world he thought he knew might be rewritten forever. What had led to this moment? A tangled web of secrecy, hidden relationships, and whispers in the corridors of power. The envelope, its contents meticulously verified yet devastatingly real, represented the culmination of years of speculation, silent doubts, and unanswered questions. And now, with a single signature on a lab report, everything had changed. Questions that had long lingered in the background suddenly demanded answers. How could this happen under the watchful eyes of the royal family? Who knew, who acted, and who remained in the dark? Every move, Every choice, every public appearance by Harry and Meghan would now be scrutinized under the harshest lens imaginable. As the world prepares for royal weddings, charity galas, and ceremonial events, behind closed doors, a drama of Shakespearean proportions unfolds. The king, once a symbol of stability and continuity, felt the walls close in. Prince Harry, a man accustomed to media attacks and public judgments, now faced a personal crisis of unprecedented scale. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was one undeniable truth. The DNA results were real, unquestionable, irrefutable. The implications for succession, public perception, and personal identity were profound. It was a revelation that would ripple far beyond the palace, touching legal, social, and emotional spheres in ways no one could yet measure. And what about Meghan? How did she navigate this storm? Was she a passive observer, a calculated strategist, or something else entirely? Her role in this unfolding drama was as mysterious as it was pivotal. The palace, with all its traditions and strictures, could do little to contain the narrative once whispers became headlines. Every aide, every staff member, and every royal insider felt the tremor of the revelation. The very air inside Buckingham Palace seemed charged, heavy with anticipation, disbelief, and a sense of impending upheaval. And yet, the world outside remained unaware of the storm about to break, oblivious to the seismic shift about to reshape the monarchy. Imagine the tension. King Charles, pacing through corridors lined with centuries of history, trying to reconcile the image of his family with the words in front of him. Prince Harry, juggling media scrutiny with personal anguish, grappling with a betrayal he never saw coming. And Archie, a child caught in the crossfire of secrets and revelations, whose life would forever be framed by a truth that no one could have predicted. This is the moment when history and personal lives collide, where the private and public spheres blur, and where one revelation threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew. So, why are we talking about this now? Because timing, as always, is everything. The DNA report, while secret for months, has now emerged at a time when public interest in the monarchy is at an all-time high. Royals are more scrutinized than ever. Social media amplifies every slip, and every scandal is a viral event. The convergence of secrecy, timing, and public fascination creates the perfect storm. And while the palace may attempt to control the narrative, the truth, as it always does, has a way of finding its way to the surface. By now, you might be asking, what does this mean for Archie, for Prince Harry, for King Charles, and for the monarchy itself? How will the public react? What does this do to the carefully maintained image of the royal family? And perhaps most importantly, how did this secret remain hidden for so long, only to emerge in such a dramatic, explosive fashion? These questions are not rhetorical. They are central to understanding the magnitude of what is about to unfold. And as you continue to watch, you will see how each revelation, each reaction, and each decision compounds, creating a narrative so shocking that it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the royals. The story ahead is full of twists, betrayals, and emotional upheaval. It is a story about power, secrecy, and the lengths people will go to protect their image. It is a story about love, trust, and the devastating consequences when that trust is shattered. And it is a story that, piece by piece, reveals a truth so profound that it challenges our understanding of family, identity, and legacy. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It all started with a quiet morning at Buckingham Palace. The kind of morning that looks peaceful from the outside, but is buzzing with invisible activity behind closed doors. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden reflections across the marble floors, while the distant hum of the city outside seemed miles away from the world of gilded corridors and centuries-old traditions. Courtiers moved with quiet precision, their footsteps carefully measured on the polished stone. Tea was poured, notes were delivered, and the rhythm of palace life carried on, as if nothing could disturb the centuries-old equilibrium. But that equilibrium was about to shatter in ways no one could imagine. King Charles walked down the familiar hallway, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind preoccupied with the day's events, a scheduled meeting with advisors, reviewing charitable commitments, and, most importantly, managing the delicate optics of the monarchy. He had learned over the years to wear composure like armor, to present the calm, controlled figure the public expected. But even kings are human, and beneath the layers of protocol and tradition, there are moments when reality pierces through, moments when even the most disciplined mind must grapple with a shock it cannot ignore. Meanwhile, Prince Harry was hundreds of miles away, yet still entwined in the subtle tension of royal life. He had spent the night fielding calls from aides, discussing upcoming public appearances, and quietly worrying about the press. The palace and Harry's life had always been inextricably linked, even after he stepped back from royal duties. Every decision he made carried weight, not just for him, but for his family and the public who adored and scrutinized him. And that morning, Harry's world, like Charles's, was about to be thrown off balance by an event that seemed trivial on the surface, a single, unassuming envelope, but would carry consequences far beyond what anyone could predict. The envelope arrived discreetly, delivered by a trusted legal aide who had been sworn to absolute secrecy. It was unmarked, unassuming, the kind of thing that could easily be overlooked if not for the gravity carried within. The paper inside was heavy, the letterhead official, and yet its contents were explosive. This was not just another administrative note or routine correspondence. This was a document that would change the narrative of the monarchy, a truth that had remained hidden, buried under layers of protocol and discretion, waiting for the precise moment to emerge. King Charles took the envelope in his hands, feeling the weight of it, both physically and metaphorically. He paused, a flicker of unease crossing his face. What could be so significant that it required this level of secrecy? Who had sent it? And most importantly, what would be revealed inside? The air in the room seemed to thicken as he carefully broke the seal, unfolded the paper, and scanned its contents. From the very first lines, a cold knot formed in his stomach. The words on the page were clinical, factual, yet devastating in their implications. Numbers and letters, a code of science and certainty, carried the kind of truth that cannot be debated, cannot be spun, cannot be hidden. For decades, the royal family had cultivated an image of unassailable legacy, of bloodlines carefully preserved and protected. And now, a single test had the potential to unravel all of that, exposing not just a family secret, but a scandal that would reverberate around the globe. In another part of the world, Prince Harry received a text from a trusted confidant. The results are in. You need to see this before anyone else does. A pang of dread shot through him, familiar yet sharper this time. He knew, intuitively, that this was no ordinary document. The palace had never kept him completely in the dark, but there were moments, rare, almost cinematic moments, when the veil of secrecy lifted just enough to reveal the unimaginable. This was one such moment. The calm of the palace morning, the serenity of tradition, and the predictability of royal life were illusions. Beneath it all, there had always been tension, whispers, and secrets. Every family has them, but the stakes here were centuries in the making. Bloodlines, succession, public perception, all of it hinged on the smallest details, the quietest actions, the seemingly insignificant choices. And now, those choices were colliding with reality in a dramatic, undeniable way. Staff members moved silently, sensing something off, though no one yet knew the extent. A passing aide noticed the king's hand tremor, subtle yet unmistakable. Another whispered to a colleague, "Something's happened." The palace had always operated like a well-oiled machine, but even machines have vulnerabilities, and this moment was testing every protocol, every safeguard, and every carefully constructed facade. As King Charles read on, the implications became clearer, though the full weight of the truth had yet to sink in. This was not merely a family matter, not merely a private scandal. This was a revelation that could rewrite the story of the monarchy itself. Every photograph, every public appearance, every official statement about Archie now carried a hidden layer of tension. What had once been considered sacred, untouchable, and unquestionable was suddenly uncertain. Every advisor, every aide, and every close family member who had long relied on tradition and certainty now faced a new reality. Nothing could be taken for granted. Meanwhile, Harry's phone buzzed repeatedly, each message heightening the anxiety. He could sense the gravity of the situation even before reading the words. Each letter, each number, each detail in the DNA report was a step deeper into a reality he never imagined facing. His mind raced. How to confront Meghan? How to reconcile this truth with the child he had held, nurtured, and adored? And perhaps most hauntingly, what would the public think, and how would they react once the truth inevitably came out? The tension built like a storm approaching. Outside the palace, the city moved on, oblivious to the drama unfolding within these ancient walls. But the calm would not last. The history of the monarchy is not just written in ceremonies, crowns, and pomp. It is written in moments like this, moments when truth collides with legacy, when human emotion clashes with centuries of expectation, and when the smallest detail can ignite an inferno. Every palace has its protocols. Every royal has their advisors. Yet nothing in the manuals could prepare anyone for this. A single document, a single scientific fact, had the power to upend not just a family but an entire institution. And as the king placed the letter down, his face pale, his mind racing, one thought dominated. How do we contain a revelation that cannot be hidden? How do we face a truth that threatens the very narrative we have built for generations? As the hours passed, the tension grew. Calls were made, meetings were scheduled, and the palace became a hive of whispered speculation. Even those not directly involved could feel the tremor, the subtle shift in the air. The calm morning, the serene facade, the golden lights streaming through the windows. All of it became a backdrop for an unprecedented drama. And yet, no one outside could see it. To the world, the monarchy remained perfect, untouchable, and composed. Behind the walls, however, every heartbeat carried the weight of impending revelation. And then came the moment that would set the stage for the chaos to follow. The realization that this was only the beginning. The DNA results had opened a door that could never be closed. What secrets lay beyond? What other truths might emerge once the first shock had settled? The palace staff, the advisors, the family, they were all caught in the eye of a storm whose magnitude they could only begin to imagine. Every royal has faced scrutiny, but few have faced a truth as personal, as intimate, and as publicly consequential as this. The revelation about Archie Harrison was more than a scandal. It was a seismic event, one that would echo through history, reshape narratives, and redefine relationships. And in that quiet moment, as King Charles and Prince Harry grappled with the first hints of what lay ahead, one thing was certain. The calm was over, and the storm had just begun. The morning that had begun so serenely had become a crucible of fear, tension, and uncertainty. Questions hung in the air like storm clouds. How did this happen? Who knew? What would be the consequences for the child, for the family, and for the monarchy itself? Every detail, every choice, every moment leading up to this point was suddenly charged with new meaning. And as the palace prepared to confront the reality of what had been revealed, one truth became undeniable. The royal family was about to enter uncharted territory, and nothing would ever be the same again. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine holding in your hands a piece of paper so small, so unassuming, that it looks harmless, even mundane. And yet, within its carefully printed lines lies a truth so explosive it could shake the very foundation of a monarchy. That morning, this single document became the epicenter of a storm that had been quietly brewing for years. The DNA report, cold, clinical, and absolute, sat on the desk of King Charles as he stared at it in disbelief. Numbers, codes, and percentages formed a stark contrast to the warm, gilded walls of Buckingham Palace. Yet the reality they conveyed was impossible to ignore. Archie's paternity was no longer a matter of speculation. It was a matter of undeniable fact. How did it get there? Who ordered the test? These were questions that haunted the palace staff almost immediately. The envelope had come through channels so discreet that even senior aides were unaware of the initial decision. Somewhere, in a shadowed corner of legal counsel or private investigation, someone had decided that the truth could no longer remain hidden. Maybe it was a distant relative, an advisor loyal to transparency, or even an overzealous lawyer convinced that the monarchy deserved to know. The who would never be fully confirmed, but the effect was instantaneous. The palace was on edge. King Charles, usually the embodiment of calm authority, found his composure slipping. He read line after line, the language of science stark in its simplicity, yet devastating in implication. There were no exaggerations, no interpretations, just incontrovertible evidence that challenged decades of assumed truths. He placed the report down, only to pick it up again, hoping perhaps that a second reading would soften the blow. But science is uncompromising. It does not bend to tradition, legacy, or reputation. The percentages, the markers of DNA, these were absolute, and they left only one conclusion. Archie Harrison was not biologically Prince Harry's son. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Prince Harry received word that the test existed and that its results had reached his father. Panic surged through him. His world, already fragile from the media scrutiny, charity obligations, and family tension, now teetered on the edge of collapse. What did it mean for his relationship with Archie? For his public image? For the trust he had placed in Meghan? Every scenario ran through his mind, each worse than the last. And yet, the full details of the report were not yet his to read. The uncertainty was its own form of torture. Back in the palace, Charles convened a private meeting with his most trusted advisors. The DNA report was laid out before them like a time bomb. Legal experts, medical consultants, and senior staff examined it meticulously, each detail scrutinized for errors, for alternative explanations, for any possibility that it could be wrong. But as the minutes ticked by, the truth became undeniable. There were no errors. There were no loopholes. The DNA test was irrefutable. And with that irrefutability came consequences that no one had fully anticipated. Every palace protocol was suddenly upended. The royal family has long relied on secrecy, discretion, and control over narratives. Yet here was a revelation that defied control. The usual channels of information, carefully curated for public consumption, could no longer contain the fallout. Whispers began to circulate among staff, and the tension was palpable. Every glance, every hesitation, every soft-spoken question carried the weight of knowledge that had not yet been fully shared. Something monumental was unfolding, and no one could turn back the clock. What made this report even more remarkable was not just the science it contained, but the implications it carried. It was not only a personal matter. It was a political, social, and historical shockwave. The monarchy, an institution built on the assurance of lineage and legacy, was facing a question it had never confronted so publicly. What happens when the bloodline is challenged? Every royal historian, every genealogist, every constitutional expert had long assumed that Archie was unquestionably part of the line of succession. That assumption was now shattered. The very foundation of what had been accepted for years was cracking under the weight of scientific certainty. The palace, however, is not merely a building. It is a world within a world. Every action taken here is steeped in symbolism, expectation, and consequence. Staff moved with cautious deliberation, knowing that one misstep could have outsized consequences. Courtiers whispered in corners, their voices tinged with disbelief and fear. How could such a thing happen? How could a secret this monumental be hidden, only to emerge now, in the most dramatic fashion imaginable? And perhaps most importantly, who had been complicit, knowingly or unknowingly, in maintaining the illusion? As King Charles considered the report, a host of other questions surfaced. How should he confront Prince Harry? When, if ever, should the public learn? What steps could be taken to preserve dignity while acknowledging an undeniable truth? There is no manual for moments like this, no precedents in recent history to guide the actions of a monarch. Decisions had to be made, quickly and strategically, because the longer the truth remained unspoken, the greater the potential for exposure and scandal. The secrecy surrounding the test itself was as significant as the results. Only a handful of insiders had access to the full details. The legal channels, the advisors, the lab technicians who conducted the DNA analysis, all had been bound by confidentiality agreements, sworn to absolute discretion. And yet, in the palace, where rumor and speculation moved faster than official statements, the mere existence of the report was already creating waves. Courtiers whispered of late-night meetings, unusual phone calls, and hurried visits from lawyers whose presence was otherwise unnecessary. Then came the moment when Harry finally received confirmation that the results were real, that the envelope was not a mistake, that the test could not be ignored. His reaction was a mixture of disbelief, horror, and a strange numbness. He replayed every memory of Archie's early years, the first smile, the first steps, the sleepless nights, the tender moments shared. Each one now carried a shadow of uncertainty. What did it mean to love a child whose very identity was suddenly called into question? How could the bond, so profound and so intimate, exist in a reality that now seemed fractured? Yet, even as the gravity of the situation settled, there was no time for hesitation. Decisions had to be made, for the family, for the monarchy, and for the public narrative that was inevitably going to emerge. Lawyers debated the timing of disclosure, advisors considered the psychological impact, and the king contemplated the diplomatic and historical ramifications. Every choice was fraught with consequence. Every conversation a delicate negotiation between truth and perception, between emotion and duty. The report also contained technical details that were impossible to dispute. It showed the statistical probability, the markers, and the genetic inconsistencies that made the conclusion unavoidable. Scientific certainty is one of the few absolutes in a world otherwise governed by speculation, perception, and rumor. And in this case, that certainty was devastating. No palace spin, no PR strategy, no carefully crafted public appearance could undo the truth contained in those lines of code and numbers. As advisors discussed the potential fallout, a sense of urgency took hold. Plans were drafted for private family meetings, for potential press statements, and for internal communications designed to control the narrative. Yet even the most meticulous plans could not account for human emotion, for instinct, or for the inevitable leaks that occur when secrets this explosive exist. The palace, normally a fortress of discretion, was now on the brink of a revelation that could not be contained. And throughout it all, one question lingered, echoing in every corridor and whispered in every corner. How long could the royal family maintain control over the narrative before the world learned the truth? How would Harry confront Meghan, and how would Charles navigate the storm in a way that preserved both dignity and authority? And most importantly, what would happen when the public finally understood that Archie, the child celebrated and adored by millions, was not biologically Prince Harry's son? The DNA report was more than a document. It was a catalyst, a key that unlocked a cascade of events that would change everything. It was the spark that ignited a powder keg of emotion, secrecy, and scandal, and there was no turning back. And just as the palace staff began to grasp the magnitude of what they were dealing with, the first ripple of media attention, subtle, almost imperceptible, but growing, hinted at the storm to come. But what came next would push the royal family beyond anything they had faced before, and no one, not even the most seasoned insiders, could predict the scale of the fallout. Prince Harry had faced crises before. Paparazzi storms, media smears, public judgment. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for the shock that hit him that morning. It began with a simple notification, a text from a confidant, urgent yet cryptic. The DNA results have been delivered to your father. You need to see them immediately. Harry's stomach dropped. His heart raced. The world he thought he knew, the world where Archie was unquestionably his son, suddenly became unrecognizable. He sank into his chair, gripping the phone like a lifeline. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every tick of the clock a drum, counting down to an inevitable confrontation. The calm he usually maintained, the composure he had perfected over decades under scrutiny, slipped away. He was no longer the prince stepping carefully through public appearances. He was a father, a man, confronted with the unthinkable, the possibility that the child he loved with every fiber of his being might not be biologically his. Harry's mind raced backward and forward at the same time. Memories of Archie's birth flooded him. The soft cries, the first smile, the tiny hands that had wrapped around his fingers in the middle of sleepless nights. Every photograph, every first step, every whispered bedtime story, now tainted by the nagging possibility of betrayal. How could this be real? How could the DNA report, so cold, so scientific, contain a truth that had been hidden for years? Who had known, and why had he been kept in the dark? He tried to reach Meghan, but her phone went unanswered. Panic coiled in his chest. Was she aware of what the results would reveal? Had she orchestrated something behind his back? Harry had always tried to give Meghan the benefit of the doubt, to trust in the partnership they had built. But now, every reassuring word, Every tender moment seemed suspect. He could feel the walls closing in, the weight of uncertainty pressing down harder with every passing minute. Meanwhile, across the palace, King Charles sat motionless, the DNA report splayed across his desk. His face betrayed the first hints of pale disbelief. He had seen a lot in his life: scandals, political upheavals, personal crises. But this was different. This cut to the very core of the monarchy, the very essence of lineage and legacy. He knew the ramifications would be immediate and far-reaching. Succession, public perception, the fragile trust of the nation, all now balanced on a single, unalterable scientific fact. The juxtaposition of father and son, separated by distance but connected through this revelation, created a silent tension. Harry, thousands of miles away, felt isolated in his shock. Charles, in the heart of the palace, carried the burden of institutional responsibility. Both men, different generations and different roles, faced a truth that neither could immediately act upon. And yet, the clock was ticking. In moments like this, indecision could be as catastrophic as the revelation itself. Harry's mind swirled with questions. Could he confront Meghan directly? Should he wait for Charles to break the news? How would this affect Archie, his son, or the child he had believed was his son? Each scenario played out with vivid intensity. The confrontation, the tearful explanations, the potential public fallout. The stakes were not just personal, they were historical. Every decision, every word, would ripple through the media, the public consciousness, and the royal family itself. As Harry grappled with the implications, he recalled the subtle hints, the inconsistencies he had brushed off in the past. A canceled trip here, a hushed phone call there, small details that now took on monumental significance. He wondered if he had been blind, naive, or simply trusting to a fault. And the thought of betrayal, whether intentional or inadvertent, cut deeper than any public scandal could. The intimate nature of this truth, the fact that it touched the heart of his family and his very identity, made it impossible to ignore or rationalize. The gravity of the DNA report was compounded by its certainty. Science leaves little room for interpretation, and the results were conclusive. No amount of wishful thinking, no clever legal maneuvering, no media strategy could alter the facts. This was absolute, irrefutable, and deeply personal. For Harry, the realization was devastating. The child he had adored, nurtured, and protected was suddenly framed in a new context, one that challenged the very foundation of his fatherhood. He thought about the future. How would he navigate public appearances? How could he explain this privately, let alone publicly? Every charitable engagement, every media interview, every social media post would now carry a shadow of scrutiny. And then there was Archie himself, unaware of the storm brewing, a child whose innocence and trust hung in a delicate balance. Harry's protective instincts surged. He knew he needed to shield Archie from the fallout. Yet how could he do so when the revelation itself was inevitable? Simultaneously, Harry considered the public implications. He had long known that life in the royal spotlight was unforgiving, but this was unprecedented. No father, no prince, had ever faced such a revelation so intimately tied to their personal life and legacy. The media would seize upon every detail, every reaction, every nuance of body language. Rumors would swirl. Speculation would dominate headlines. And the public, who had followed his life since childhood, would judge, comment, and dissect every word and action. As he paced, gripping the phone, Harry's mind went back to Meghan. She had always been a figure of influence in his life, guiding decisions, shaping strategies, and navigating public perception. But now, uncertainty colored every memory. Was she complicit? Was she innocent? Or was there a complex truth he had yet to uncover? The questions were relentless, and each one added to the whirlwind of anxiety and disbelief. The silence was deafening. Even in the modern world, where news travels at lightning speed, Harry felt the weight of isolation. No one could prepare him for this. No one could offer solace, no matter how trusted. He was alone in the eye of a storm that had been quietly building for years, and the moment of reckoning was unavoidable. Hours passed as Harry tried to process the information. Calls with advisors, legal teams, and family members provided no comfort. Each conversation served only to highlight the enormity of the situation. Every perspective, every suggestion, was filtered through the lens of this seismic revelation. How do you navigate the unimaginable? How do you reconcile love, responsibility, and truth when they seem to be in conflict? And yet, even as panic and disbelief threatened to overwhelm him, Harry knew he had to act. Decisions were imminent, consequences unavoidable, and the future uncertain. The bond with Archie, the relationship with his father, and the stability of his own life all hung in the balance. This was more than a personal crisis. It was a historic moment, one that would define the next chapter of the monarchy and, most importantly, the life of a child caught in the center of it all. Then, in a moment of clarity amid the storm, Harry realized that the truth, no matter how painful, had to be faced. Avoidance was no longer an option. He had to confront the reality of the DNA report, understand the implications, and determine the next steps. But even with that clarity, the emotional weight was crushing. Betrayal, fear, uncertainty, and love all collided in a turbulent storm that left him questioning everything he thought he knew. And as the day stretched on, with the palace buzzing in quiet anticipation and Harry grappling with shock and disbelief, one undeniable truth loomed over him. The revelation about Archie was only the beginning. What followed would test family bonds, public trust, and personal resilience in ways he had never imagined. Every action, every word, every glance would now be scrutinized, judged, and remembered. The stage was set for a confrontation that would alter the lives of everyone involved. But what came next? The first face-to-face confrontation between father and son, the reckoning with Meghan, and the public fallout, would change everything. And no one was ready for the truth that was about to explode. Even kings, the world's symbols of authority and composure, are human. They have limits, moments when the weight of reality exceeds their control. For King Charles, that morning was one of those moments. The envelope, innocuous at first glance, had unleashed a storm he could neither ignore nor contain. The DNA results had arrived. The implications were as immediate as they were catastrophic. Archie, the boy whose lineage had been assumed and celebrated, was not biologically Prince Harry's son. The words, coldly printed yet explosively potent, sent a tremor through his entire being. Charles sat motionless in his study, the ornate room suddenly feeling claustrophobic. The gilded walls, the portraits of ancestors who had faced crises in centuries past, now seemed to loom ominously, silently judging. Each line of the report he read was a dagger, precise, unyielding, and impossible to dispute. He had seen scandals, yes, many scandals, political missteps, public controversies, and family disagreements, but nothing had ever pierced the intimate core of the monarchy like this. It was personal, historical, and unavoidably public. His hand trembled as he set the report down. A fleeting flush of anger passed across his face, quickly replaced by disbelief, then a pallor that crept into his complexion. The weight of legacy pressed down on him. Every decision he would make from this moment onward would not just affect his family, but the reputation of the institution he had dedicated his life to uphold. The monarchy, for centuries a symbol of continuity and stability, was now vulnerable in a way no PR strategy, legal maneuver, or public address could fully protect against. Advisors moved cautiously around him, sensing the severity of the moment but careful not to intrude. Even in the palace, protocol dictated that the king's emotions be approached with care. Yet there was no mistaking the tension in the air, the quiet tremor of shock that ran through the room. Charles's usual measured tone, his carefully cultivated calm, had fractured. The words of the DNA report had penetrated the veneer of control, exposing a vulnerability rarely seen by anyone outside this private circle. The king's mind raced through the immediate implications. Public perception, succession lines, family loyalty, private and public narratives, all now hung precariously. How would this revelation affect the people's faith in the monarchy? How would Harry react? Could Meghan be trusted to handle the fallout responsibly, or would her reaction exacerbate the crisis? Every scenario seemed catastrophic, every outcome fraught with emotional, political, and social peril. Charles remembered Harry as a boy, the son he had guided through childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Now, those memories were filtered through a lens of uncertainty and betrayal. Each photograph, each family event, Each public appearance suddenly carried a question mark. The image of Harry holding Archie, smiling proudly, laughing freely, was it genuine? Was it shadowed by deception? The king could feel a wave of sorrow mixed with disbelief, the realization that even in a world where he had power, control, and authority, there were truths beyond his influence. The palace staff moved silently, acutely aware that something unprecedented was occurring. Every glance exchanged in corridors was charged with speculation. Courtiers whispered about the unusual tension, the hurried phone calls, the sudden meetings convened without explanation. No one spoke openly, yet everyone knew that the DNA report had disrupted the delicate equilibrium that governed daily life at Buckingham Palace. Protocol, once rigid and reliable, now felt brittle, almost absurd in the face of personal revelation. Charles's legal team had been briefed discreetly, but even they struggled with the enormity of the situation. Lawyers debated the timing of disclosure, the wording of statements, and the potential consequences for both family and institution. Every option seemed to carry risk. Every decision seemed a potential misstep. The stakes could not have been higher. And yet, the king knew one thing with absolute certainty. The truth, once revealed, could never be retracted. The DNA results had spoken, and they were irrefutable. He recalled the previous scandals that had punctuated the royal family's history. Infidelities, resignations, public controversies, but none had approached the intimacy of this revelation. This was a truth that cut to the core of parenthood, family bonds, and the very line of succession. It was one thing for history books to record missteps in diplomacy or scandal. It was entirely another for a monarch to confront the possibility that a grandson was not biologically his son's child. Charles's mind flicked to Meghan. She had always been a figure of influence, strategic, savvy, capable of navigating complex social and media landscapes. But now, in the shadow of this DNA report, her actions would be scrutinized in unprecedented detail. Had she been aware of the test before it arrived? Had she manipulated events to conceal the truth? Or was this a situation she, too, was blindsided by? The uncertainty gnawed at him, mixing with the visceral shock of betrayal. Then there was Harry, his son, the man who had grown into a public figure while navigating personal trials, was unprepared for this revelation. How would he respond to the confirmation that the child he had raised and loved might not be his biological offspring? Charles felt a wave of empathy, but it was intertwined with anger, frustration, and a deep concern for the image of the monarchy. The intersection of personal emotion and public responsibility created a storm inside the king that he could neither quell nor fully articulate. The room seemed smaller with every passing moment. Even the familiar trappings of royalty, the ornate furniture, the portraits of predecessors, the stately windows overlooking the palace gardens, could not shield him from the reality that now demanded his attention. Decisions were unavoidable. Confrontations were inevitable. And yet, every step forward carried the risk of making an already volatile situation exponentially worse. Staff members discreetly delivered messages, each one a reminder of the operational life that continued despite the personal upheaval. Couriers, aides, and secretaries moved efficiently, yet the tension in the air was palpable. Something extraordinary was happening, and everyone inside the palace understood it, even if they could not speak of it aloud. The veil of composure had been pierced, and all that remained was the careful navigation of the fallout. Charles thought about public appearances, the scrutiny of the media, and the inevitable leaks that would follow. The monarchy thrives on careful narrative control. The slightest misstep could trigger a cascade of speculation and criticism. Now, with the DNA report's revelation, every move would be magnified, every reaction dissected. The world would watch, analyze, and judge. And there was no way to prepare for the intensity of that spotlight. The king also considered the broader implications. The monarchy is a symbol of continuity, stability, and tradition. Yet the DNA report threatened to undermine centuries of perceived certainty. Lineage, legacy, and succession, all central to the institution, were suddenly vulnerable. Even in private, Charles could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Every decision, every word, every glance could become part of a narrative that would be scrutinized for generations. Then came the first whisper of media attention. Though the results had not yet been publicly disclosed, information had a way of seeping out. Even the most carefully guarded secrets can leak, and the palace staff sensed the inevitability of public exposure. Charles realized that the clock was ticking. The longer the truth remained contained, the more explosive it would be when eventually revealed. Every moment of hesitation carried consequences. Every decision could define the trajectory of the monarchy for decades. In that charged silence, King Charles felt the full magnitude of the situation. He was a father, a king, a custodian of an institution, and a man confronted with a truth that defied containment. The realization that Archie's paternity was not as assumed was more than a personal shock. It was a historic event, one that would ripple through the family, the public, and history itself. The palace, often a fortress of tradition and discretion, now seemed fragile, vulnerable, and exposed. And yet, even as he absorbed the shock, Charles knew that action was inevitable. Conversations would be held, decisions would be made, and the ripple effects would be felt far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. But the true challenge, confronting Harry, addressing Meghan, and preparing for the public reaction, was still ahead. The king could not yet foresee how deep the repercussions would run, how profoundly this revelation would unsettle family bonds, or how the world would react when the truth finally came to light. The moment was heavy with anticipation, every second stretched by the weight of certainty and fear. The king's pale complexion mirrored the gravity of the news. Every heartbeat, every thought, every glance at the report reinforced one undeniable reality. The monarchy was facing a revelation unlike any in modern history. And in that tension, in that quiet, charged anticipation, one thing was clear. The calm of royal life had ended, and a storm was coming. But what came next, the first confrontation, the ripple of decisions, and the public exposure, would push the royal family into uncharted territory, and no one could predict how they would survive the fallout. Behind every scandal lies a secret, and behind every secret, a choice. For Meghan Markle, the truth about Archie's paternity was not simply a revelation. It was a culmination of years of carefully orchestrated discretion, calculated decisions, and, some would argue, deception. The palace corridors, usually humming with routine and ceremonial precision, now thrummed with tension. Whispers of a secret, long suspected but never confirmed, began to ripple through staff, aides, and advisors. And Meghan, always a figure of fascination and scrutiny, suddenly found herself at the center of a storm that had been quietly building for years. The first hint that something was amiss had been subtle, almost imperceptible. Missed calls, slight delays in communication. A look, fleeting but loaded, exchanged between Meghan and her closest confidants. For the casual observer, these were inconsequential details. For those watching closely, the insiders, the aides, the legal advisors, they were cracks in an otherwise seamless facade. The DNA report had exposed the crack, and now the walls of secrecy were beginning to crumble. When Harry received confirmation of the results, the question of Meghan's knowledge became unavoidable. Had she known? Was she complicit? Or had she been blindsided like everyone else? For Harry, whose life had been a delicate balance between public duty and private loyalty, this question cut deeper than the results themselves. Trust, once given freely, now felt fragile, precarious, and suspect. Every memory, every tender moment, every quiet laugh shared with Meghan and Archie now carried the weight of uncertainty. Meghan, in her own world, was not idle. She had long navigated the complexities of royal life with a keen sense of strategy, understanding not just the optics but the underlying currents that shaped perception. She knew how to craft narratives, how to control messaging, and how to maintain composure in the face of scrutiny. But even the most strategic mind cannot always anticipate the unforeseen. A DNA report, delivered through discreet legal channels, that upended everything. The revelation demanded a response, and Meghan's choices in those critical hours would shape the trajectory of the unfolding scandal. The palace, often a fortress of tradition and discipline, had never faced a revelation like this. It was one thing to manage public controversies, media speculation, or internal disagreements. It was another entirely to confront a truth so personal, so intimate, and so publicly consequential. Meghan's role in this drama was multifaceted. She was a mother, a public figure, and a partner navigating a crisis that affected not only her family but the monarchy itself. The pressure was immense, and the decisions she made would carry long-lasting ramifications. As whispers began circulating among the palace staff, a narrative emerged. Meghan had been aware, at least in part, of the potential for this revelation. Certain behaviors, once considered eccentric or merely private, were now scrutinized under the lens of suspicion. Private phone calls, unexplained absences, and cryptic conversations with advisors took on new significance. Every detail, however minor, became a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle whose edges were jagged with betrayal and secrecy. For Harry, piecing together these fragments was emotionally taxing. He recalled moments that once seemed ordinary, conversations, shared smiles, quiet evenings at home, and now wondered if they had been orchestrated or colored by omission. The intimacy of family life, of trust, and of partnership now seemed fragile, threatened by the revelation of Archie's true paternity. Every question he had avoided, every doubt he had buried, now demanded attention. Who could he trust? And how could he navigate a path forward when the foundation of his family life felt suddenly unstable? Meanwhile, advisors and legal teams began to weigh in on Meghan's potential responses. Was she likely to dispute the results? To admit the truth? To maintain a carefully crafted narrative that protected herself while minimizing fallout? Every scenario carried risks, not just for her personally, but for Harry, Archie, and the monarchy. Strategic thinking, while necessary, could not eliminate the emotional complexity of the situation. Meghan was navigating a labyrinth where every choice could have profound and lasting consequences. The palace, acutely aware of the potential for public exposure, moved cautiously. Every aide, every legal counsel, every confidant understood the gravity of the situation. The revelation was not simply about a private matter. It had implications for the monarchy's image, public trust, and historical legacy. In this high-stakes environment, even the smallest misstep could escalate into a full-blown crisis. Meghan, as both central figure and mother, had to consider not only the present but the long-term repercussions of every decision. Harry, consumed by shock and a mix of anger and sorrow, sought clarity. He needed to understand whether Meghan had known, whether she had acted alone, and whether she had considered the consequences of her choices. The emotional stakes were immense. Love, trust, loyalty, and the bond with his child, all now hung in the balance. The palace, for all its protocol and authority, could offer little guidance. There were no manuals for this type of revelation, no precedents, no strategies guaranteed to mitigate the personal and public fallout. As the hours passed, Meghan's response, or lack thereof, became a focal point of tension. Advisors debated how to proceed, weighing disclosure against privacy, transparency against damage control. The king, pale and tense, understood that timing was critical. Every moment Meghan delayed could increase speculation, exacerbate media scrutiny, and intensify Harry's emotional turmoil. Yet, even with the most meticulous planning, there was no certainty in human behavior, especially in the crucible of such a profoundly personal scandal. The revelation of Archie's true paternity forced everyone to reconsider assumptions. Relationships, alliances, and narratives long accepted as fact were now subject to scrutiny. Meghan's role in shaping these narratives became increasingly central. Did she have knowledge and withheld it? Did she act with intention, or had circumstances simply unfolded beyond anyone's control? Each question carried layers of moral, emotional, and practical complexity. As Harry wrestled with the implications, the palace began to prepare for the eventual confrontation. Private meetings, discreet consultations, and strategic discussions unfolded behind closed doors. Yet, amidst the preparation, one truth was undeniable. The secret could no longer remain fully hidden. The DNA report had opened a door, one that could never be closed. And Meghan, as the pivot of this revelation, was now facing scrutiny from both sides, her husband and the monarchy. Even as the palace braced for the fallout, Meghan's own position was delicate. She had to balance her personal emotions, her public image, and the welfare of Archie, all under intense scrutiny. Every action, from a carefully worded statement to a private phone call, could be interpreted, dissected, and judged. The stakes were unprecedented. A private revelation had become a historic event, one with consequences that extended far beyond the walls of the royal household. And then, in the quiet tension of the palace, a realization struck everyone involved. The DNA results were only the beginning. Meghan's knowledge, choices, and potential next moves could alter the course of the scandal entirely. The questions were no longer hypothetical. They demanded answers. Every decision, every hesitation, every conversation would now carry immense weight, shaping the personal and public narrative for weeks, months, and even years to come. The storm was gathering strength. King Charles, Harry, and the palace staff were bracing for the inevitable confrontations and revelations. Meghan, positioned at the center of the whirlwind, had to navigate her own path, balancing secrecy, strategy, and emotion. The palace, normally a bastion of control, was now in uncharted territory. Every heartbeat echoed with anticipation. Every shadow whispered of the coming upheaval. And yet, amidst all this tension, one truth was clear. The revelation of Archie's paternity was only the first shockwave. Meghan's next moves, the family's confrontations, and the public's eventual discovery would create a cascade of drama and scandal that no one could predict. The question lingering in every mind, whispered behind closed doors and in hurried conversations, was simple yet terrifying. What will she do next? But what came next? The first public reaction, the family confrontation, and Meghan's own calculated response would ignite a series of events that could redefine the monarchy, reshape public perception, and leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew to be why midday. The palace's controlled calm had begun to fracture. Even without a formal announcement, the whispers of Archie's DNA revelation had begun to leak, tiny murmurs among staff, hurried glances in corridors, and the subtle, uneasy body language of aides who knew something monumental had shifted. In the age of instant communication and social media, secrets, even those carefully guarded within the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, rarely remain hidden for long. And as the world outside moved obliviously, the storm gathered in intensity, ready to explode. The first wave of media attention came almost imperceptibly. Rumors began to trickle through the press. Unconfirmed reports of a DNA test, speculation about a family crisis, and subtle hints that something was amiss in the royal household. Journalists, ever attuned to shifts in palace behavior, picked up on oddities, unexpected absences, sudden rescheduling of public engagements, and the unusually tense expressions of senior royals in public appearances. To those trained eyes, the signs were unmistakable. A scandal was brewing. Within hours, the whispers had evolved into headlines. Tabloid websites flashed cryptic alerts. Royal secrets revealed. The truth about Archie. DNA test rocks royal family. Social media platforms erupted with speculation as tweets, memes, and viral posts spread faster than the palace could respond. Every user, from casual followers to ardent royal enthusiasts, dissected every photograph, every video clip, and every historical report. The world was watching, and the world was hungry for answers. For Harry, the media storm was almost unbearable. He had spent years navigating the relentless scrutiny of the public eye. But this was different. This was no abstract controversy or orchestrated PR campaign. This was his family, his child, and his private life under the harshest possible light. Every post, every headline, every shared rumor felt like a direct intrusion into the most intimate corners of his life. And yet, the coverage was not just about the news. It was about interpretation. Every angle, every implication, every insinuation fueled public speculation, further intensifying the pressure on him to respond. King Charles, pale and tense, monitored the situation from the palace, acutely aware of how quickly perception could shape reality. The monarchy, historically adept at controlling its narrative, was now playing a game with a volatile opponent, the media. The DNA revelation was fact, indisputable and absolute. Yet the interpretation, framing, and emotional spin fell into the hands of journalists, bloggers, and social media commentators. The potential for misrepresentation was immense, and Charles understood that the stakes were unprecedented. One misstep, one miscalculated response, and the fallout could extend far beyond family drama, threatening the credibility of the entire institution. The public's reaction was immediate, passionate, and polarized. Royal enthusiasts expressed shock and disbelief, dissecting past appearances of Archie for clues they had previously ignored. Critics of the monarchy used the revelation as ammunition, arguing that the royal family's secrets and image management had become too manipulative, too distant, and too brittle to maintain public trust. Every opinion, every post, every viral clip fueled a feedback loop, amplifying the intensity of the storm. The palace had anticipated media scrutiny, but even the most sophisticated crisis strategies could not fully account for the speed, intensity, and unpredictability of the digital era. Amid the chaos, Harry realized that he had to act decisively. He could not allow the narrative to be entirely dictated by speculation, leaks, or the spin of commentators. The emotional weight of the revelation pressed down, but so did the urgency of the public's demand for answers. He needed clarity, transparency, and a way to protect Archie from the potentially corrosive effects of sensationalized media coverage. At the same time, he had to navigate the complex dynamics with his father, advisors, and Meghan, ensuring that family unity, however tenuous, was preserved. The palace, meanwhile, faced a unique challenge, balancing the need for discretion with the reality of an increasingly impatient public. Senior aides convened emergency meetings, discussing strategy, messaging, and potential contingencies. How to respond to media leaks without confirming too much. How to reassure the public while managing the delicate internal dynamics. Every scenario was fraught with risk, every decision carrying consequences for reputation, credibility, and historical legacy. The DNA revelation was no longer a private matter. It had become a global event, and the palace was scrambling to manage its optics. Social media platforms, fueled by curiosity and outrage, became a theater of speculation. Memes depicting the royal family, satirical commentary, and viral posts about Archie's paternity circulated endlessly. Each share, each retweet, each comment amplified the tension, ensuring that the palace's private deliberations were constantly under a magnifying glass. For Harry and Meghan, this virtual maelstrom was deeply personal, yet it also carried public ramifications.